I get the feeling you don't know. I know it's hard for you to see.
Before we get into the meat of this episode, I have a brief announcement. Four Songs will be taking a bit of a breather until mid-May. Yeah, I'm going to take some time off and get ready for what's going to be an exciting summer. Got lots of cool stuff coming down the pipe, but I can't really believe it. And I can't talk much about it now, so just stay tuned. Anyway, make sure you subscribe to the show or follow me at 4songs2 on Twitter so you don't miss anything, because trust me, you're not going to want to. Until then, though, let's take a deep dive into the songwriting process with one of the most unique and intrepid songwriters that I've talked with so far. Berkeley, California-based Emily Brown. Blessed with a voice recalling Joni Mitchell in her California heyday, Emily is a thoughtful, deliberate artist who looks for beauty everywhere. She's also an explorer, mining musical inspirations as diverse as Glenn Campbell, Loretta Lynn, and the lush orchestration of The Sound of Music. Sometimes all in the same song. I spoke with Emily in early March via Zoom from her California home. Like all of us, she's been cooped up since last spring as the pandemic continues to wreak havoc. Last fall, Emily released a second album called A Fish of Earth, right smack in the middle of COVID. She's been unable to tour, though she's found peace in doing live streams and playing music with close friends who are within her pandemic pod. A Fish of Earth is an adventurous album, brimming with experimentation, symphonic melodies, sparse pianos and guitars, and so much more. We talk about four songs in particular: Amen, Amen, I Get the Feeling, Traipsing, and Game Show. On one song, you might be hearing a haunting, lonely church organ, while on the next you hear a cacophony of strings and woodwind instruments. Emily credits these sounds to her collaborators, Bly Wallentine and Stuart Wheeler, but it is her spirit and voice that shines throughout. Lyrically, Emily takes a deep dive into relationships throughout the album, mostly personal about her partner, but also about her family and her Mormon identity. Religion and God are felt throughout, as Emily explores where she fits into this changing and dynamic world. As someone who's raised Catholic, I can relate to figuring out whether and where these pieces come together, and sometimes they don't. This interview is as educational as it is musical. We get a bit philosophic at times, but at its core, this is about songwriting. Emily talks candidly about her craft and how this album was a cathartic experience to write and record. So to all you aspiring songwriters out there, get those notepads ready and welcome Emily Brown to Four Songs. Thank you, Emily, for joining me tonight. This is a great pleasure for me to be chatting with you here on Four Songs, so I appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
Well, great. So we're going to be talking about mainly your new album called Fish of Earth, which came out in October.
Mm-hmm.
But, I started this back in May of last year, which is almost a year ago, which is incredibly hard to believe.
Yeah.
And this is right as the pandemic was hitting. So what's life been like for you in the last almost a year now?
Oh man, I mean, a lot of walking my dog around my neighborhood, significantly more hiking. I'm glad in some ways that the pandemic has kind of pushed me outside, and I don't know, I mean, just less social, but in other ways, a lot more creative, which I'm thankful for. So I don't know, hard and also beautiful. It's a very weird time.
Yeah, I was being curious how it's affected people's ability to be writing, when you're not getting that interaction or that just living a normal life. Has it affected your writing?
It's absolutely a different kind of writing. It's less inspired by personal experience. Different sorts of things happen to you when you're out interacting with people. I feel like I used to be very inspired by just odd interactions that I would have. I'm walking around in downtown Berkeley, and today I feel like what I write about is much more introspective and a lot more about nature, because that's, I don't know, so much of what I'm able to experience right now is just like, I can be outside, I can be with my partner Kyle, I can hang out with my dog, and other than that, it's quite limited.
Yeah, kind of same here. So one thing I was curious about, because you released this album in the height of the pandemic, and what was that like for you as you were kind of seeing the release date getting nearer and also thinking, I don't know if I can tour to support this, or what was that like for you watching this get closer and closer and the uncertainty continuing?
Yeah, it's absolutely been confusing. And I think as I was kind of choosing the release date, I pushed it back a couple times and thought, okay, like maybe by that point, in the months after that, it might be possible to tour. Now it's March, and it's kind of, it's been almost 6 months, I guess. At the end of this month, it'll be 6 months since October, which is crazy. And time just feels so plastic right now. So it's hard to, yeah, it's hard to even look at it in a way that feels clear. But I don't know. I think by October, I had watched lots of other people who I admire release albums and do creative things related to music. So I do feel lucky that although I was kind of like in the height of the pandemic when I released my album, there were at least for me 6 months of other people kind of figuring out how to release music. And it has been like an opportunity to think creatively.
When did you first start writing songs, and what was your earlier inspirations to get you to that direction?
I think I've been excited about both music and language for about as long as I can remember, which is sort of weird. Like when I was really little, I just watched The Sound of Music all the time. I was like obsessed with it. And I wrote my first song, I think, when I was 12. And I don't know, I think there's something really special about childhood when, you know, a creative idea occurs to you and you don't have as much judgment as you do when you're an adult. Like there are certain things that I feel more intimidated about trying. Like for me, example, painting is pretty intimidating to me, or playing the drums is pretty intimidating. And I shy away from those things. But I do feel like when you're young, like really young, you know, a kid, it's less scary to be a beginner because you're a beginner at everything. So I think I just kind of thought like, yeah, I can do this. And I played the piano a little bit and definitely have like the practice has changed and developed. But I feel like now at this point, I'm trying to get back into that beginner state where I'm less judgmental of myself and like can just let things happen, which is actually a big part of this record. Anyway.
Yeah, I definitely hear it. There's a lot of freedom, I feel like. And
yeah.
You mentioned Sound of Music. Just I hadn't really put that together, but there is a lot of just orchestration and just big sounds. And
yes.
So we'll talk about Fish of Earth. And so what I was asking you, just what led you to take that direction with this album and just create such a broad sound, at least musically?
Yeah, I think a big part of it was informed with the help of my collaborators, Bly Wallentyne and Stuart Wheeler. I had kind of inched in this more orchestral direction with the album before this, which was Beat Eater. Mm-hmm. And I remember talking to my producer about that album and thinking like, oh, I know what sound. It kind of took me a long time to figure out what I wanted with that record. And that was sort of a harder experience because it was kind of one of my first more intense and drawn out album production experiences. So it took me a long time to figure out how to interact with the producer. Just generally, it was that was a really new experience for me and pretty hard. And I think A Fish of Earth was different in that I had an experience under my belt. I knew a little bit more of how I wanted to get started. And so I met with Bly Wallentyne and Stuart Wheeler like 6 months before we even started production. And we just talked about like what we wanted. We played different tracks for each other and just sat around for a couple of days, kind of figuring out how the album would be. So it was a really collaborative process. And we took a pretty radical move in pulling out largely piano and guitar, which are the instruments that I play, and then transcribing my song demos pretty directly into like orchestrated arrangements, which was the work of Bly and Stuart. That's not something that I feel capable of on my own. Yeah, I think that's something I've always wanted to try doing and kind of felt incapable of, and I'm just like really grateful to these people for collaborating with me on that. And I also think my role in a big way was just like being open to trying different things, because the album that I made before this, I feel like I held the creative direction very tightly and I was very perfectionist about it. Mm-hmm. And I think my experience making A Fish of Earth was kind of relinquishing that a little bit.
So we're talking about 4 songs from A Fish of Earth. Will be Amen, Amen, I Get the Feeling, Traipsing, and Game Show. And these are all incredibly diverse, and some of them are kind of haunting too, in a way. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned the instrumentation. I mean, that's what hits me right away. And so you mentioned, and I think I talked about it too, just a sense of freedom that came with this one. How did you set that tone? Was it just like you said, relinquishing some of that perfectionist control over it, or was it something?
Yeah. I I think some of it was, yeah, a personal attitude, kind of wanting to have a different experience with this record. I also definitely owe a lot of it to my collaborators. So if you go and kind of listen to their other stuff, they've both done kind of just really diverse types of music, like worked on all kinds of things. And I think what's unique, honestly, about both of them is kind of that ability to improvise a little bit, treat music in a playful and improvisational way. They both also studied experimental music with some of the composers in Utah where I went to school. And I think just having that energy around helped a lot. And I think it also helped that we did so much of the work in real time. So, we recorded all of it kind of in one setting and in 10 days where we were all in the same city, even though like I live here in Oakland and they lived in Provo, Utah at the time. So we all came together and kind of like made this little workshop of it, sort of like an artist residency thing, so that we could just get it done and be in that space and be kind of committed to that space and to playing together and just like seeing what would happen. And I think, yeah, I guess it's making me think about how hard that is to do now during COVID, right, and how grateful I am that like it happened and that, I have this record now that's sort of this document of a time when, in-person collaboration was much easier and much more present. And I do think there's something really special about that. And I look forward to a time when I can do it again.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about the songs. So we'll start out with Amen, Amen. And to me, this is kind of a haunting song, but I love that the way it opens with that church organ.
Yeah.
What was the inspiration for that? Just the beginning of that one.
I did want this song to feel kind of like a thesis of the album, as it like starts off at the beginning. There was a moment when we were just listening to the songs in alphabetical order and like, so it just happened to be at the beginning. And it felt really good to me because both lyrically and sonically, it feels like this very foundational thing, it's got this religious feel. It opens with these religious words that translate to, let it be.
Amen. Amen. Are you a friend or are you a lover? When we don't talk to each other, I get tired again.
I think it's just sort of like articulates the wish of the album that is something about partnership and transcendence. And yet I like that it's kind of almost percussive in the way that it's just like da da, like just really kind of overemphasizing those words in an interesting way. But yeah, I think it says these things in kind of a murky and, like you said, a haunting way about expectations of monogamy and expectations of religious life that I think are pretty central to the album.
Yeah, I was going to say I hear that, relationships generally, but that just can be different types, different people and family and God and partners and
yeah.
And with this one, is this kind of, you say, kind of to kickstart the album, because I feel like there are so many different relationships in this album.
Yeah.
Is this like a kind of a general, like, to set the stage, we're going to be, or is it kind of more of a personal, like, one-on-one relationship?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of general. I definitely feel like the album largely is directed at my partner, and I think that's something that's easy to relate to. Is just like there's the idea of the romantic other, and that's everywhere in popular music, in any music, forever. But I think this album is also trying to play with that, with the notion of the kind of romanticized other, which I think also in poetry and music can kind of shape shift into the other as lover, or the other as spouse, or the other as God, or the other as parent. I think this song, like the rest of the album, is kind of trying to push that boundary. But I do think it is like, yeah, there's the romantic other. That's the easiest way to get to it. But yeah, I also feel like I'm trying to play with that.
Yeah, that's, it took me a while to find the one for me. And so I appreciate lines like, you said I don't feel like you understand a thing I've said all day.
Yeah.
I've been there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, so much of this album is about like trying to cross a bridge between like your own thoughts and another person's thoughts, and how hard that is. And that's like at the center of so many relationships, is just trying to be like, can we communicate? Like, can we understand each other, and can we feel understood by each other, you know?
Said I don't feel like you've understood a thing I've said all day. I said I think I did. I just moved too fast. I got into my car and sat there in the quiet. True lovers, true lovers, true lovers, they don't fight.
That's kind of the major shift between part one, part two. We go into kind of a drone thing there. And I remember I'm pretty sure that was Stuart's idea, because when I composed it, I had these kind of like arpeggiated moving chords. I think the drone makes it feel much more meditative, because those are, you associate drones with like monks singing in an abbey, stuff like that. And I think that really adds to the seriousness of it.
That when I found someone, it would be easy, like Sunday morning. Now I know that nothing's easier. Nothing's easy, like Sunday morning.
So the next song I wanted to talk about was I Get the Feeling. And I feel like this song is probably the most straightforward kind of poppy song that we're going to be
Yes.
talking about. And this is
Yeah.
where you hear that kind of Glenn Campbell, but your voice is kind of has that Joni Mitchell vibe. But just
Yeah.
from your perspective, how did you first come up with this? Was this sort of a guitar? Because you said you write with the guitar
Yeah.
initially. It sounds like this would have been one of those songs, but I'm just curious.
Yeah. I'm a huge Glenn Campbell fan.
Okay.
Which I think is really clear in this song. I feel like the influence is very, very clear. And I'm also just a huge fan of that time of music. My mom used to watch the Howdy Doody show like a lot as a kid. And that era of music is like very beautiful to me. And actually that's a direction that I want to pursue more with kind of albums that I'm working on right now. That's a whole other thing. But yeah, I wrote that song originally. I was just kind of singing it in the kitchen while I was doing dishes. And I think the melody really controls the song. And then I kind of picked up a guitar and was like, okay, I'm gonna, put this in. And I knew that it was gonna be a Western song, and that was, really central to it. And I wanted it to feel kind of saucy in the way that like Glenn Campbell or Patsy Cline feel to me, or Loretta Lynn, I wanted it to feel like I have a thing to say and I'm gonna say it, and it's the most important thing there is in the world right now.
I get the feeling you don't know. I know it's hard for you to see. I'm gonna say it clear and slow. You ought to stick it out with.
Yeah, I come from cowboys on my mom's side. My great grandpa like roped at Madison Square Garden and stuff like that. So like pretty in that world. And I also think like I'm really proud of the fact that my my grandma who lives on a farm in Arizona, this is like her favorite song on the album, which I'm really happy about.
Yeah. So you said you kind of have this melody in your head. So that's one thing I think that separates those who can write songs and those who can't, because that you just kind of wake up and kind of you start hearing it, and then you just got to get your guitar. I mean, anytime inspiration hits.
Yeah, yeah.
It works.
There's a thing in Julia Cameron's book, The Artist's Way, that talks about how like kind of doing meditative or repetitive activities can help inspire you. She talks about like cooking or doing dishes or even like driving. And I do think that has been the case for me, that like sometimes I'll kind of get interested in maybe a line that I thought of or something while I'm on a walk or while I'm doing the dishes, or, you know, but yeah, I don't know if that's totally unique, except for that, like, it is a skill that you start kind of paying attention to those types of thoughts. Like, I think for me, a big part of my brain that wants to go there is that when I hear a little piece of language that I think has an interesting rhythm, it gets me really excited. And I think that's like, that might be the part of my brain that is like a songwriter innately or something. I don't know. Was there a line in the song that got you moving on in this direction? This song really just poured out of me, which is something that is rare for me as somebody who is a songwriter. So well, that's what I was going to ask you, because it does feel like, because I don't know, I guess I've been talking to a number of different musicians and songwriters, and they always say, you know, there's the ones that just come out, there's no explanation for it, there's no like scientific method, but they're the ones that sometimes there's just something special about them. Yeah. There's just something unique, and they can't really explain it. So I guess, do you feel that same way? That just like, here it is? Yeah, I do. And I feel like a big part of that is like just being willing to show up. Mm-hmm. But I do think like there are habits that you can establish that allow you to be there when something like that might happen, and you can just kind of talk in a way that feels right for the moment. I do think if there's something relatable about it, it's like everybody probably has those moments where you're, I don't know, in a highly emotional or stressful situation, and you finally say the perfect thing, you know, and everything just comes out of your mouth like, that's exact, you know, it's like when you think about arguments after the fact and you think of what would have been the right thing to say, every once in a while, there's a moment when you really do say the right thing and the other person really understands you and you communicate it correctly. I think that's what writing a good song feels like in that moment, where for some reason your brain is just functional in a way that it's not in other moments. Yeah. Yeah. And lyrically, to me, this is a pretty uplifting song, I feel like. Yeah. Kind of confirming, you know, it's again about a relationship, but just I like the line I like the most, I think, is, I know my sweet isn't always sweet. I know my kind isn't always good. And I just like that just admitting, hey, you know, I'm not going to always be 100%. Yeah. I'm going to try. Yeah. I know my sweet's not always sweet. I know my kind's not always good. If there's a place where we can meet, I mean, I think we can, we should. And if I haven't made it clear, I'm gonna try and make it true. I gotta say it while you're here. I wanna stick it out with you. You know, there are moments when, if a relationship isn't going perfectly, you kind of have two choices where it's like, you can stick to your guns and say like, no, I really believe in this thing. Or you can kind of say like, oh yeah, this is going badly. But I think when you're committed to a relationship, it's kind of both. It's like, yeah, this is kind of shitty, but like, I believe there's something important about this. And like, I really want to do it with you, you know? Mm-hmm. And I really like how the song ends with the saxophone and the background singers. So good. Yeah. Yeah. So what are they saying? I couldn't quite make out what they were saying. They're saying, I get the feeling you don't know. Oh, okay. that's all Bly Wallentyne. They arranged this song. I think, it just like came to them one night, speaking of, transcendent revelatory music experiences. And the sax is Logan Hone, who's an amazing musician in his own right.
So got 2 more songs, and thank you again for your time. I guess it's afternoon where you are. It's probably why I look a little out of the shade here.
Yeah, a little darker.
Yeah. So Traipsing. And this song is in my head right now, so that tells you how catchy it is. So how long, I feel like there's just a lot of different arrangements in this one. And how long did it take to put this one together for you?
This song is probably the most directly transcribed from like a voice memo that I sent to Stuart. So I sent him a voice memo of the way that I played it on the piano and kind of mistakes and all. And Stuart liked it so much that he decided to transcribe it, mistakes included, it like to string. So there are some parts in there that are kind of dissonant and feel really experimental and weird. And that is like absolutely a Stuart choice. It's not a choice that I feel like, it's not a choice I would have made up on my own. And it is a choice that I think was very informed by my choice not to be so perfectionist about this record. I would say that the arrangement for that came together pretty quickly just because it was directly based on how I was playing it as I was writing it.
So, but lyrically, this feels like it could be, again, about a relationship for love, but also kind of bigger than that in a sense.
Yeah. For me, this song is very directly about my partner. It does kind of incorporate these romantic ideas. And particularly the romantic period, like in American and British literature, where there's this sort of idea that some of the greatest beauty is like in your home or like in these very natural kind of like in simplicity. That's where like beauty can be found. I like thinking about how if you pay attention to minor things or things in proximity to you, you'll find more beauty in them.
Yeah, and the word like traipsing, it makes it seem like you're really not looking that hard, but you are trying to. You're
just
getting
like
there.
Wandering around.
Yeah.
I go traipsing in the mountains for a sliver of your love. Oh, I go traipsing in the mountains for a sliver of your love. Turns out your love is in our living room. Turns out your love is in our living
And so
I just like that. That's another thing is I just like language. And so I feel like I end up using kind of like words that are fun to say sort of on accident and then going along with them.
Yeah. Well, this is probably one of my favorite one on the album just because it's just in my head right now. And it's a one thing when you're doing the instrumentation or when you're working for collaborators, you had like that skeleton on your voice memos. And when they came back to you with the ideas and you heard it, was it just like, wow, this is not what I expected, but this is just really awesome? Definitely was really, I think the moment of kind of hesitation was when we were doing pre-production, because they told me, like we sat down and Stuart was like, what if it sounded like this, and we played. So I feel like I had a concept of what it was going to be like. So
So by the time we were sending arrangements back and forth and listening to like the MIDI versions of what it would be like before we recorded it in person, I was very into it. Like it wasn't not meeting my expectations by that point. But I do think as we were deciding together, it was like, what if we transcribed it exactly? I think that was the moment of hesitation for me where I was like, do we really want to like transcribe this kind of like really early draft? And I'm really glad I went along with it because I like it so much now.
Yeah. So I want to thank you again for your time tonight or this afternoon.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Where we are. So the last song I wanted to talk about is Game Show. And I think this one lyrically, I think probably hit me the most because I feel like there's just a lot going on here. And it's talking about a lot of different things. So just from your, when you're putting this together, what was your mindset just lyrically for this?
Well, if you want to know about kind of the direct moment, it was a pretty early time in my relationship with my partner, Kyle. And, we were arguing about where we were going to go for Christmas, and I'm quite close with my family and very emotional about my relationships with my family. And so I was kind of, worried about like, what are our levels of commitment to each other? How do we show our families that we love each other? We're not married and, might not ever get married. We're not sure, it's a complicated question in itself. I think it was a pretty intense moment of confusion where I was very early on in, this long-term relationship and kind of wondering what we meant to each other. How did we express that? If we show up for Christmas or don't show up for Christmas, like, what does that mean to our families? What do they believe about us or about our level of commitment, especially as two people who we both have weird relationships with our home religion, which is Mormonism. So, it definitely doesn't jive with the way that our families want us to be Mormon. So I don't know. Yeah, a lot was going on and I was just in one of those really emotional moods about it. And that's kind of where it came from.
Yeah. So the theme, I guess, the game show, which makes it seem like, we're just going to answer some questions and then we're going to win. But then it's not about that. So I'm just curious, what was the game show? How did that come to you as a symbol?
Early on in this relationship, I had a really hard time just like talking about things. And so my partner and I would get into kind of this pattern where he had to just like we had to kind of like tensely interrogate each other. And sometimes it felt like he was so sure of himself and I was so unsure of myself that it almost like didn't feel fair. It was like he had all the right answers and I just had to like kind of deal with that or something. And I think that was kind of confusing. And sometimes it did just feel like, okay, here we are on a couch, like having this really intense conversation. And it didn't feel, it didn't always feel loose the way that you want a conversation to feel with your romantic partner. It kind of felt like we're just going to slog through this and it's a little bit scripted and maybe we've been over it before,
If I have the questions and you have the answers, and if this is a game show, you're gonna win. But it isn't a game show. We're just sitting on couches, saying things that need saying, and I'm caving in.
And I also feel like, and maybe I'm just interpreting it too far at times, but there's also, I feel like, the discussion with God. And you mentioned the religious aspect of it. I was always Catholic, so I symbols and all that. It's always like stands out to me as a raised Catholic. I don't practice that anymore, but so I was just kind of curious as well from your perspective. Was then you mentioned it just about your family's religion and how that plays a role into it. And in this song, is that I feel like you're addressing that a little bit here too.
It might be about family. I don't know if they'll love me outside the church.
I was a deeply religious Mormon. I served a Mormon mission in Russia. And so that's a huge, huge part of my life. And honestly, a really intense experience in my life to kind of navigate a less, like a lapsed relationship with it, where, now I live with my boyfriend, not married, I do a lot of things that people who are really Orthodox would not be into, even though I still feel like I want ownership over my Mormon identity because it's my ancestors and, it's just a big part of my life and what informs who I am. And I think my family and, that was a scary thing for me to navigate with my family, because a big part of what made my family close was kind of this agreed upon participation in the church, kind of all in the same way, that was something we could connect on, even if our personalities or interests were different otherwise. I think a cool thing about religion is that it kind of forces you to engage, not forces, but asks you to engage in things that are mysterious and beyond you and can make you feel like, remind you that the universe is really big or something. But sometimes that same thing feels really lonely and really alienating. And I think this song is kind of doing those two things, where it's saying like, there's this distance from the partner and distance from the family and distance from God that are kind of all going on here.
Was this a hard one to record just because there's just so many different things going on and it seems so personal?
Yeah, definitely. A lot of it, so we recorded a lot of it live. This is probably the song that terrified me the most to like make the, because there's the kind of the crescendo and the screaming like at the end. When we were done with it, I was like, oh no, I think I made like a terrible mistake. Like, especially because in the past, I had at least one review that kind of penalized me for not doing pretty stuff all the time. And it's kind of scary to be, a female singer-songwriter with a voice like the voice that I have and not always, do it beautifully or in a way that is kind of stereotypically beautiful. But I'm really glad that I stuck with it, because at this point it feels like it represents the emotional turmoil much better than not having done it would have been. But yeah, largely that song we recorded just all in person together. So it was me and the string players and the winds all in the same room, and then Stuart was leading us because the rhythm is kind of funky, so you need someone in between there. And
well, so to wrap up, and again, I appreciate your time tonight, Emily. What do you expect for the next few months? I mean, getting out a little bit, maybe you got people getting vaccinated. I mean, what are your expectations?
Man, I over the next, I mean, who knows when playing music will be possible again, but I do think as things become safer, I would love to start doing outdoor shows. Yeah, I'm hard at work on my next album, which is, hopefully going to be a fun project. We'll see.
Yeah. And so you mentioned support. So what's the best way for fans to support you right now?
They can follow me for updates on Instagram. That's a good place to just see what I'm up to. And then I've got a lot of merch on Bandcamp, which is at emilybrown.bandcamp.com. And my Instagram is Emily Brown Music. We got a lot of vinyl. So if people want to buy a vinyl, this record is really, really beautiful physically and just sounds really beautiful on vinyl. And I think that's a great way to support me.
Okay. Well, thank you again for your time today, Emily. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Well, my thanks again to Emily Brown for joining me. And like she said, go check her out at Bandcamp at Emily Brown. From what I'm told, Bandcamp really does support the artists more than most other websites out there. So go up there and go get some merch. And another thing, like I said earlier, I'm going to be taking some time off. So I'm going to be catching my breath and getting ready for a pretty busy summer. Got some really cool stuff coming down the pipe, so stay tuned and subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss anything. It's going to be really exciting. I can't believe it's all coming together. So stay tuned for more, and I'll see you in a little bit.